Winning where it matters with our faith. Somebody say, God is about to do a new thing. It's not that God is not doing new things in this earth. It's just some of us, our eyes are too closed to see. And our spiritual eyes are so dim and closed, but our physical eyes are wide awake. We're looking at the world and what it has to offer, and we're telling ourselves that belongs to me. But when it's time for our faith to increase in the Lord and what he says is for me, all of a sudden, this doubt creeps inside of me. Where is your doubt when you get to the end of your 2 weeks of work and that check is supposed to hit your account? Do you annoy your job's payroll office the same way you annoy heaven? Daily, I find myself trading the time of thanksgiving with the time of asking, can you do it faster? Should I be offering up a thanksgiving? Should I be offering up a praise? Because if I'm honest, my faith is small. And if we're going to dive into the concept of winning where it matters with your faith, you have to understand, though you have it, you also need to address it. You may have faith, but when is the last time you assessed it? Where is my faith? Though I know that God is good, though I know that Jesus died for me, though I know, my question is, how does my faith respond when it's something that I can't control? All right. When you can't control the outcome of your scenario, does your faith shrink? What I saw in my life is all of a sudden people take this mantra of I can do it myself when I find out that what I had hoped for in the Lord didn't happen in the timing that I wanted. All of a sudden when the marriage is on the rocks and your faith is high because it's like, Lord, restore my marriage. And all of a sudden when that spouse is still acting like they lost their daggone mind. All of a sudden now you going through their phone and you finding yourself checking their GPS and you hiding in the trunk of the car and you living out a Tyler Perry movie, bad wigs and all. Honest question. Have you confused your faith with your ability? Have you confused it? Have the lines blurred so much in the last year of your life that if you honestly did an audit on your faith, you would find out that it's been your hands moving and not your mouth praising? I find myself not allowing myself to sit still and let God be God. I find myself twiddling behind the wires of my life in the dashboard of my hope. I see myself messing with the settings of privacy and the settings of hosting in the back end of my web page of my life. I see myself. If I'm honest and I audit my hope, I find that it's not been in Christ, but it's been in the environment that I place myself in. And if the environment is not conducive to my wants, I find myself struggling to say yes. As we talk about faith, we have to understand that you have to have a mindset that says faith begins where I can't. Where I can't. That's where my faith begins. And the problem that we have is a lot of us, our faith is rooted in our ability. Oh, I got faith in doing audio because I spent time learning it. I have faith preaching. I spent time studying. I have faith showing my kids a good time. Why? Because I'm a kid at heart. But when it comes to sitting and having to wait for a healing in my body that the medicine didn't respond to, all of a sudden, that faith that I held on to actually has me debilitated in fear. As we jump into this text, as you know, I love the word. And we're going to walk it today. Why? Because you have to understand everything that you want God to show you in this next season of your life, he already's done. He's already did it. What is it that you need God to do that he's not already done in his word? What you need, your marriage restored? He did that. What you need, healing in your body? He did that. What do you need, provision in your account? He did that. What do you need, your mind regulated? He did that. What do you need, deliverance from evil spirits? He did that. What do you need, your literal eyes blinded with scales on Damascus for you to experience an encounter with him? He did that. Stop trying to get God to break the mold of who he already is and just let him be God. All right, y'all ready? Go ahead and start turning to 1 Kings, because I want you to find it in the word before we read it. This is my challenge to you. I'm going to take time. I'm going to take time. Every single week, I'm going to let you find it, because the enemy will confuse you and make you think that you don't know no better because you didn't read it yourself. I want you to find it so during the week you got a point of reference to go back to. Right when you get in the car and your mind start tripping again, I want you to stop the car and find it. 1 Kings. Chapter 17, we're dealing with the prophet Elijah. And in this season of his life, we see here that Elijah is in a moment of worry. Why is Elijah worried? Because Elijah has ticked off two of the craziest people who have literally made Baal worship everything. And Elijah in this season, he told them, I serve a God who can defy gravity, fire, water, the sky, and earth. Can I tell you, faith doesn't happen at the latest miracle. It happens in the silence of waiting for the next. We experience here, Elijah is coming off a great victory where these sorcerers and magicians have literally conjured up these encounters, but there was one thing they couldn't do. They couldn't cause a consuming fire. Whew, I'm gonna get myself together. They could not cause a consuming fire, and in that moment, we see Elijah causes these individuals to be on watch. But after that, there was a time where the Lord told him that there will be a great drought. Somebody say drought. Yep. And it says here in the text, as we're about to jump in, there is a time coming where water will not be available. Yep. It's one thing to be thirsty, but it's another to be thirsty when there's nothing around. We see here in 1 Kings chapter 17, verse 7. I want to go to verse 7. It says, after a while, the wadi dried up because there had been no rain in the land. After a while, the wadi dried up. Somebody say wadi. I looked at this word in this description, in this version, and it was interesting because I was like, oh, a valley. But this word stuck out because a wadi, if you look at the definition, it's a valley or a ravine or a channel that is dry except in the rainy season. I want to dwell there for a second because you have to understand what you've been calling a desert in your life is a wadi. And you've been misappropriating what God has once called water to flow in, but you keep calling it a desert place. But the Lord is saying in this season, don't call it what it's not, but call it what it is. And what you think provision in your life is dried up and nothing's ever coming back, you have to call it for what it is. It's not that water never will come back. It's just the fact that right now it's dry. And a lot of times what we'll do is we'll move on beyond the place that is soon to hold water again. Because it's easier to walk around than it is to stand and wait. It's easy. It's easy to relocate when you're waiting for God to do something. But what's going to happen when you're nowhere near where God's ready to deliver? A wadi, a valley, a ravine, or a channel that is dry except in the rainy season. I don't know who needs it today, but rain is coming. That's who needs it. Rain is coming. You've been in a drought long enough. Rain is coming. If you don't know if it's coming or not, you need to just look back on the days where water was there. Look back on the days. There's been more days of the water being present than there ever was where the water was dry. But the enemy will cause you to highlight the moments and not remember the miracles. And if I remember correctly, Lord, you delivered me to this wadi. Because honestly, in my sinful nature, I was out here wandering around in these streets, doing all manners of evil and such on demon time. Okay, I'm back. And you see here that the Lord has placed you in a place that once withheld the blessing. I want to go on to this text here. And it says here in verse 8, then the word of the Lord came to him. Pause. Faith starts with the word from the Lord. And a lot of us, before we even dive in this text and you take this out of context and you go on Instagram posting up scriptures and everybody start calling us heretics because now you're doing it all out of whack. Then the word of the Lord came to him. A lot of us are wasting years in our life having faith for something that God never promised. And you can wait as long as you want. That's not faith, that's stupidity. If God did not say it's for you, if he did not speak it in front of you, if he did not say, I shall give this unto you, I'm letting you know right now you're having hopes. You're having desires. But that's not faith. It says here, then the word of the Lord came to him. You guys ready? Here it goes. Verse 9. Get up, go to Zarephath, that belongs to Sidon, and stay there. Woo! Some of us, our faith is already jacked up because we like being in transit. But what do you do when the Lord confirms to you that he has something for you, but you got to remain standing? You got to remain standing. Faith has an address. It does. Your faith has an address. And for some of us, that's why we think that a city is the thing that activates our faith. I ain't had that type of faith since I was back at that old church. I ain't experienced that level of faith until my mama prayed for me. I haven't experienced that level of faith until I fasted for 90 days and 90 months. And I haven't experienced that faith until Kirk Franklin dropped that song called Stomp. If your faith is attached to a moment, you don't have faith, you have a monument. We see here that it says, stay there. Look, I have commanded a woman who is a widow to provide for you there. I commanded a woman who is a widow to provide for you there. You guys ready to walk this? I'm excited. Before you even dive into faith, you got to focus on God's promise. You got to focus on God's promise. If you're not focused on the promise of God, what you will end up doing is you will change the promise as you walk. And there's nothing worse than showing up to a God-appointed time with a misaligned vision for what God said. God said, I will provide for you in this new city. And here you are walking, and it's going to be a big house. There's going to be a new car. It's going to be a new husband. These kids are going to get up out of my house. And when you show up to the appointed place at the appointed time, now your faith has been rattled because you've created a demands list where God says, I've only given you provision. What is the base level promise? What is the base level promise that God is giving you? You have to keep the focus on the promise of God. How do you do that? You remind yourself daily of what God said. And you do it by being in the Word. You do it by praying. You do it by fasting. You do it by worshiping him. Because if I constantly stay in your presence, I know that you're able. Keep the focus on God's promise. You guys ready to dive in? Verse 10, it goes on to say, so Elijah got up and he went to Zarephath. First step of faith is move. Move. Faith without works is okay. It's dead. But faith with works against the will of God is treacherous. If you're working against the will of God, it's not your faith activated. It's you literally sabotaging your own destiny. Faith without works is dead. He gets up. He got up and he went to Zarephath. And when he arrived at the city gate, there was a widow gathering wood. First things first, before you get to the end of the promise and you celebrate at its completion, you should start praising God at the sign of his will being done. I would have given God a whole praise party the moment I saw the widow. And some of us wait for the person to do what we were told they would do before we celebrate the act of God. But just at the moment of you telling me to go the right place at the right time to see the right person is enough for me to give you praise. Oh, God help me. We still got praise withheld up in us from 1999. Because you still waiting for the housing market to crash for you to get the house that you want. Baby, that thing been sold on Zillow for 120 days. But will you praise him because you didn't get evicted? Because while your head was up in the cloud and you were buying furniture for a house that he never said was yours, he still kept you. Because they should have had the sheriff come and kick you out. All right, Mike. He finds the widow. The widow is gathering wood. This has to be a hit to Elijah's confidence. Because though God tells him the promise of who would be there and what they would do for him, he never told Elijah what type of person she would be. He said a widow, but he didn't say a rich widow, and he didn't say a poor widow. Some of us have this hope in our lives that when God sends us on a journey to get to the promise, that who he's sending us to will have everything we need right then and there and more. Because for us, the sign of God's provision is the person you're sending me to has more than I've ever seen in my life. Let me prove it to you. That's why some of y'all on your bucket list, you only have men and women who are rich for you to be able to date. For some of you, the job that you've asked God to give you only comes with a 6-figure salary and not a starting base. For some of you, you haven't even got a car, but you skipped the provision and you went straight to the Tesla, not knowing that you don't even pay your electric bill, let alone charge a car. What do you do when your faith steps over what God said? We see here that now Elijah is showing up to Zarephath and he's finding the widow, but he finds her collecting wood. That shows me that she doesn't even have the ability to send someone to gather it for her. What will you do when your promise needs help? What will you do? What will you do when your promise looks like it's on its last leg? Will you stop proceeding? Will you call on heaven for a redo? Will you turn around and go back to what's comfortable? Or will you proceed? Shall I proceed? Yes, indeed. All right. We see here in chapter 17, verse 10, it goes on and it says, Elijah called to her and said, please bring me a little water in a cup and let me drink. Bring me a little bit of water in a cup and let me drink. This seems strange, but in the next verse, you're going to understand why this request is massive. It says, as she went to get it, he called to her and said, please bring me a piece of bread in your hand. All right, let's hold on for a second. Elijah shows up on the scene, and he does what a lot of us don't do. He tests the promise. He tests the promise. Because we find ourselves in companionship or in proximity to what God said, and we stop there. You got to engage with the promise. You have to get beyond your comfort zone, which means that even if you're not thirsty, you got to step in and ask for something to show that God is in it. You want to know why this is interesting? Because Elijah had just been fed by ravens, food and water. So if I just experience an encounter of the miraculous proportion of provision, where you cause the bird to provide my meals, I have to now step out of an old promise and activate faith in my new. Because at the end of a promise begins a new one. And at the end of Elijah waiting for the ravens to provide, he now engaged with the next step of his promise, which says, God, I'm putting the bookend on what you said would happen, and now I'm walking in faith into what I've yet to see. Because the moment that the woman says yes to doing what the birds have been doing, God no longer has to maintain, because the new promise is activated. And for some of us, we were scared to walk in the old promise, but we become so comfortable in the yes and amen of God that we don't even want to step out in discomfort to see if the water can withstand the weight of my perseverance, to know, is my faith still good? What will you do when the promise that you thought would never end, the expiration date is showing? What will you do when the ravine where you were fed now has led you to a widow who don't got not near nutter? Translation: what do you do when the widow that you approach has nothing to offer? There we go. There we go. All right. I got y'all. I got you. Whew. We see here, she goes to get the water, which shows one thing. You want to know something interesting about this text? I've skipped this time and time again. And this is why I always say stay in your word, because the Lord will show you things anew. In the text, before Elijah made the journey, he said, I've commanded a widow to provide for you. Which means that conversation has begun on the other side of my wait. Which means even while I'm waiting, God proceeded before me and he set a table in front of me. So even while I was walking, he was preparing, which means that as soon as I get to the other side, I don't gotta wait, because they already know what they gotta do. And here you are showing up bashful to your promise, hoping that you gotta knock on the door and say, do you know me? Not knowing that if you walk in the promises of God, the person that God has set on the other side of the promise will be aware of your time coming, and their attitude will already be postured to say yes. There's nothing worse. I've been on the other side of the promise where I've been told to do something for someone, and there's nothing worse than me trying to get through what God told me to do, and you don't even got the attitude to receive. I'm trying to give it up, and you talking about, no, you hold it. Baby, you need it. You look impoverished. I could tell you hungry. But it's interesting. So God commanded the widow, which means conversation had already begun with the widow in Zarephath, which shows that she had a conversation with God, which to me shows she had relationship. Why is this important? Because in Zarephath, it is literally the pinnacle of Baal worship. If there was ever a place that you did not want to go, it was Zarephath. Why is this important? Because God will take you to a place that you don't think you belong and have somebody on the other side who has ideals and standards which match the will of God, and they'll stand out like a needle in the haystack. And here you are trying to go to a Christian college when God wants you to go to a regular 4-year so you can cause revival to break out, and you keep trying to change the promise of God. And God says, I did not mess it up. Baby, I want you at Nova. I want you to stand in the classroom. Because if you get around other people like you, your promise won't be activated, because they'll do all the faith for you. What do you do when your environment is your excuse for not extending your faith? Well, everybody's praying God, so why do I need to? Everybody's worshiping God, and why did I need to? Some of us didn't even make it through 21 days of prayer and fasting, getting on the Zoom calls, because around day 6, when you saw a consistent group of people showing up, all of a sudden you didn't feel the urge. Jesus. You'll find yourself in a season, if you're not careful and you keep your eye on the promise of God, you will exclude yourself for what happens in the transition. It's in the transition that I get to see the miraculous wonders of God. We see here that you have to understand that a conversation was had. This widow was aware of what was coming and who was coming and what she would need to do. But what's interesting is the woman was okay getting him a cup, but as we see here, he responds and says, please bring me a piece of bread in your hand. And in her response in verse 12, she says, as the Lord your God lives, I don't have anything baked. I don't have anything baked. But you said, God, that you commanded her. So what do I do when the promise conduit, right? There's the promise giver, the promise keeper. I'm the promise receiver, but the promise conduit. What do I do when my promise conduit is stingy? What do I do when the person who's supposed to be the catalyst to my breakthrough acts like they don't have it? What do I do? Do I turn back? Do I say, obviously I missed it. God, I was supposed to go East Jerusalem, and I turned right Zarephath. We'll get it all mixed up. But we see here in the text, her response is, I don't have anything baked. But I love how she says, as the Lord your God lives, which actually puts her in a predicament because she confessed the Lord before she said what she couldn't. Which tells me that the predication of her next statement is based upon her knowledge of knowing what God requires. And the question is, who are you in this season? Have you not been giving what God asked you to give as the promise conduit? Because everybody likes to be the promise getter. Everyone loves to receive a promise. But what happens when someone shows up on your doorstep and God told you to do it 6 months ago and now you acting like you broke? You had money for Netflix, Disney, Hulu, Peacock. What else they got? PBS. You got money for everything else. What do you do? What do you do when your cabinet is empty when God told you it was time to make a cake? You showed up. You told me you go get water, but that water's not yours. But what will you do when I ask you of something that dwells in your house? How will you respond? She says in response, only a handful of flour in the jar and a bit of oil in the jug. Just now I am gathering a couple of sticks in order to go prepare it for myself and my son so we can eat it and die. Dramatic much? Why is this important? This is important because you have to understand it's easy to say what she won't do, but what would you do if a drought was going to hit your house and you didn't have anything else? Some of us save the best for last because we don't know when our end day is coming. She was okay to give the water, but the moment that the promise encroached on her perceived destiny, she said she didn't have it. And for some of us in this season, our faith only stretches to our comfort. And where you're comfortable, your faith lives. But the moment that discomfort knocks on your front door, all of a sudden you become a heretic. You become a backbiter. You become anti-church. All of a sudden, the church that you were attending when your faith was growing no longer suits you. Them same worship songs got you over when you need a breakthrough. But now that God's asking you to be the person on the other side of the worship song, to be the provider. I believe you're my healer. Now here you are got to be the one to send somebody food because they're sick, and now all of a sudden your Uber Eats account don't work. What will you do when what is required of you in this next season regarding your faith makes you uncomfortable? She says, I'm gathering a couple of sticks in order to go prepare a cake for myself and my son so we can eat it and die. You have to understand in this next text that Elijah said to her in verse 13, don't be afraid. Go and do as you have said, but first, make me a small loaf from it and bring it out to me. Afterward, you may make some for yourself and your son, AKA feed me, then you can go die. Can I tell you? Some of us don't have the boldness to let someone walk out their desire, but you still got to give up to me what belongs to me. See, that's not PC. That's not millennial church. That's not modern Jesus. Everyone loves modern Jesus. They love foot washing Jesus. I love table flipping Jesus. You have to be bold enough in the promise of God that you'll walk up to what already owes you based upon their yes. I got to get that up off you. So though you may decide to go live out your life however else you please, there's a blessing that you got to give up. Which means that I have to speak in a way with confidence that it's not out of my will, it's based upon what you told God you would do. He said a widow would provide, and you're the widow. You confirmed it. Come up off that cake. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. And don't be scared. Don't be scared. Don't be afraid. Go and do as you have said. But first make me a small loaf from it and bring it out to me. Afterward, you may make some for yourself and your son. How would you respond in this season with your faith if God was asking you to give up what you perceived as your last to let someone survive? Let's make it plain. How would you respond if God asked you to give up your last piece of hope? Your last chance of hoping that a relationship would go well? What would you do if the promise you prayed for, God was asking you to give up? Some of us will say, surely this is not the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Wrong phone. We see here in this text as we move on in verse 14. It says, for this is what the Lord of God of Israel says. The flour jar will not become empty, and the oil jug will not run dry until the day the Lord sends rain on the surface of the land. Pause. Elijah's response is, I got to get beyond your feelings to get the promise made. I have to get beyond your excuses to proclaim to you what God told me. Before God told him who she was, he told him what he would provide. Which means that I have to get beyond my unction to cuss you out. Oh, these saints don't act like they do. I seen your IGs. You talk like that. You kiss your mama with that mouth. We see here that he has to get beyond what feels comfortable. Some of us, we allow our emotional IQ to disqualify us from the promises of God. You haven't been confident to speak to someone in decades because the last time you spoke up, they shut you down. But when's the last time you talked on behalf of what God said he would do for you? All of a sudden, a faith should rise in you. A strength should rise up in you. A roar should rise up in you. When is the last time you spoke according to the promise of God? You'll speak differently, which means that Elijah's response was, though you choose to die, I still need you to do this. But on the other side of your confession, there's a promise. Because everyone loves the promise, but no one likes to look how it affects the people around them. Can I tell you, some people around you would cheerlead you on than the promise of God if you let them know how it affects them. When's the last time you looked at your promise and how it benefits the people around you? We're so arrogant. We're so prideful. We're so isolated that we only look at promises as me, mine, and this. How does this promise affect me? How does this promise affect mine? And how does my faith affect the outcome of my life? She was so consumed with dying that she said no. But the moment Elijah made her aware of the promise of God and that her jars would not be empty, it goes on to say in verse 14, that in 15, that she proceeded to do according to the word of Elijah. Maybe your breakthrough is based upon how you communicate. You don't talk with faith. You talk with hope. I hope they do it. I hope that I was convincing enough. Faith says if you do A plus B, it equals breakthrough. That's what faith does. And that's why some of us, we don't even look at sickness the same. The doctor may say cancer. I see cancer. I see Jireh. I see cancer. I see Nisi. I see cancer. I see a mind regulator. On the other side of my confession, I'm speaking with faith, because when my faith aligns with his ability, breakthrough happens. Okay. Quiet. All right. She proceeded to do according to the word of Elijah. And then the woman, Elijah, and her household ate for many days. Let's try that again. Then the woman, Elijah, and her household ate for many days. Could it be that the endless supply of resources in your life are attached to you communicating your faith? It's easy to talk to yourself about what your faith is, but how do you communicate what God said is supposed to be done? Do you do it and articulate it in such a way that the people around you have no chance but just to hope for you? I've been around some people who got some crazy level of faith. I mean, crazy. You don't know your relationship and your friendship until someone tells you that God has told them to do something and it doesn't make any earthly sense. God said, I'm finna be a millionaire. Can I tell you what love is? Love is sending them a financial coach seminar that they would be able to manage what you haven't even seen. Oh, it's quiet. What do you do when the person around you expresses their faith in hopes that you would join and lock arms with them in prayer and hope, when they tell you, I'm believing that I'm going to come out on the other side of this addiction whole, and here you are seeing them as a mess up, when you should be locking arms with them saying, well, where are we going to go eat on your 90-day celebration? Okay. What do you do when your spouse, who has shown you every reason why you shouldn't trust them, says, this time, baby, I'm going to do right, and I'm doing it with the faith of the Lord and the strength of the Father? What do? Do you continue to sleep on the couch? Oh, now we testing the waters. What do? Does your faith level rise with hopes? I tell people all the time, I am a rope dealer. I deal rope. If you're around me, you know I say, I deal rope. I just give it to you and you do what you please to do, and it'll show me who you are. When you supply people with the opportunity to either show themselves or show themselves, the problem is your faith is attached to control. Good Lord. Your faith is attached to control, and if you can control it, that means God's in it. What do you do when you don't have access to the controls? That's why you need people around you who have a faith level that either matches yours, is identical to you, or they know the source which you are looking to see it provided. We see here in this text as we close out, it says, the flour jar did not become empty and the oil jug did not run dry, according to the word of the Lord. You have to be mindful in this season that when we're talking about faith, you have to understand that you have to get beyond what you believe your ability is. Okay, well, I don't know about that, Pastor. Hebrews 11. Hebrews 11, verse 1. We out of here. Go ahead and find it. Don't worry. We ain't going to move. Hebrews 11. Hebrews 11, 1. It says this. Now faith is the reality of what is hoped for, the proof of what is not seen. Faith is the reality of what is hoped for, the proof of what is not seen. Can I wreck your brain a little bit? The proof is not in what you hold. The proof is in who you have your hope in. And a lot of us, our faith stopped the moment we couldn't carry what God promised. The moment that I couldn't touch the promise, my faith was disturbed. Faith is the reality of what is hoped for, the proof of what is not seen. It's the proof. I remember the old saying, the proof is in the pudding. The proof is in the provider. It's in the provider. And if you're saying in this room, well, Pastor Marcus, I'm trying to win. I really am. I'm trying to win where it matters. I really, really am. But I just haven't had the strength to have faith anymore. Can I tell you, try again? Try again. Try again. But here's my challenge to you. Try fully, with a hope and desire that God's will would be done. Our faith in this last season has been in the results of what we wanted and not God's will. Maybe God's will in your faith in this season was for you to experience what grief is through the death of the loved one that you thought was going to make it through. We love faith when it produces great results, but how is your faith when the loved one that you wanted to see make it through decided to put themselves on do not resuscitate? Where is your faith when all that you hope for in the relationship, that this would be the last one, and they decided to show you they're just like all the other men? Where is your faith when everything that you did to live a healthy life, that all the faith that you had to live a life that was pleasing God, of what you put in your body and what you put in your mind and how you read the books that were right, what do you do when the doctor finds a lump in the body that you procured based upon your works? Where's your faith? Where's your faith in that marriage when you did everything to show them that you love them? From the moment that you locked eyes to the moment that you changed vows, and now all of a sudden they don't love you since you had the baby. Where is your faith? Where is your faith? When the God that you trusted for over 20 years doesn't show up when you want him to based upon your wants and needs. Where is your faith? When you can't find the time to see God in your situation, where is your faith? This season, we have to make a decision. Do I cancel my faith in the seasons I can't see him? Or does my faith go stronger in the things I've yet to see?
What an amazing word. Thank you so much for being here with us at Motivate Church. If this word impacted you in any way, hit the like button and let us know in the comments. But take it a step further. Share it with a friend, share it with a family member that you know their life could be changed by this word. Subscribe to our YouTube channel as well and hit the notification bell so that you don't miss anything that's happening within the life of the ministry. And if you would like to partner with us financially, click the link in the description box. We love you and we'll see you next week.